Bi Phenomenon podcast. I am your host, Shane Hazen, and with me for the third straight week, we continuing this tradition, is Ted Haycraft.
Torturing our audiences out there.
Yeah, we're still doing this format, figuring out things. I made an amendment immediately after we recorded last episode where I'm starting to think maybe there needs to be a certain amount of enthusiasm from one person on the like. I mean, no. We both love Dick Tracy, obviously, but the first episode, my pick was a movie that we wanted to like, but I was negative on. I've had a thing for a few years that Aaron Sorkin a few years ago wrote this great essay about David Fincher after they'd worked together on Social Network, and he talked about how David Fincher won't talk negatively about other filmmakers, and the specific reason he said it because he knows firsthand that making movies is hard and it's easy to get wrong, and he understands why movies go wrong. And so I took that to heart, and I've always
that's interesting you bring that up because a friend of mine at work, he's not there any longer, but he kind of threw that at me. It's like, Ted, you're you're really what it takes, how hard it is, and the creative process, and everything about movies. That's why I think you're such a much more nicer and much more kind to movies than other people.
And I've said it to you many times. I think your infection is something that, like, one of the reasons I love talking to you about movies. It makes me feel better about it. And it's just, whenever you start to tear apart a movie or just nitpick why it doesn't work, unless there's something, there can be a communal fun and like coming together why a movie doesn't work and realizing together. But for the most part, it's cheap. It just doesn't add anything.
No, if anything, I want New York. I want, when we talk about, I want that to work.
We both wanted it to work.
Yeah, and I think it does in some aspects, but then a lot of things it seems to stumble somewhat too.
Okay. Well, we should move on to today's movie, which is my pick. But you said you have something you want to read.
Yeah, I'm gonna have. I got a book here I brought on directors, and I'm gonna have Shane. My eyesight's getting bad, so I want Shane to read this opening line about Michael Powell here,
the director of the film we're using today. Highly individual British filmmaker responsible for some bizarre but beautiful entertainments over 44 years as a director, many of them showing remarkable use of color. His films are intrinsically British, yet almost all of them tinged by the desire to do something different. Thus, some of his work is refreshing, some exciting, some demanding, and some stimulating. When some of these qualities meet, as in A Matter of Life and Death, Black Narcissus, or Peeping Tom, he comes close with his sense of opulent visual beauty to creating a masterpiece that refuses pigeonholing into any particular genre.
Good, that's stop there. This is a 1983 book.
Who wrote that?
By a British guy. His name is David Quinlan. And he saw Peeping Tom in the theater as a kid, like 13 years old, and loved it or something. So one reason I wanted you to read that, because this is 1983, and the description of him, in 1983, and still to this day, Michael Powell is almost like a secret.
Yeah, very much so, and especially this period you're describing, he was virtually unknown.
It was, you hear Scorsese talk. He talks about he does an intro on the disc of another Powell film. I know where
a great Criterion edition. Yes,
I know where I'm going.
Oh, I was talking about.
Yeah, no, there's another film called I Know Where I'm Going. There's several Powell films on Criterion, and Scorsese does his Into the Camera intro, and he talks about how he would see these bits and pieces of these films on black and white TV cut up, and Coppola would see some. And
he gave the same intro on A Matter of Life.
Oh, maybe that's on there too. Maybe I'm mixing it up. And he said that we would talk about these and trying to figure it out, and then I came to him because of Scorsese's obsession. So, I mean, I was reading somewhere where, like, Red Shoes is almost a religious to Marty.
I can believe that.
But a Laserdisc, they all some of these Laserdisc before the DVDs came out, and they had Colonel Blimp and Red Shoes and stuff, and they had these commentaries with Martin Scorsese and Michael Powell commentaries. But of course, I'm a diehard Scorsese fan in the 70s.
Yeah, so just in case we haven't made it clear, today's movie is A Matter of Life and Death from 1946. And Ted,
I think we are talking about a qualified masterpiece by Powell.
What's so funny hearing you talk is I think this whole recording is just going to be a competition for who loves this movie more.
Well,
yeah. So you and I. Okay, I want to start out by pointing out. You and I, over the years, have had this ongoing conversation about. We talk a lot about. We usually frame it in comics, but it's about mainstream, historically American mainstream sophistication. About when did sophistication, adults level sophistication, come to the mainstream? We talk about it mainly in comics, but then you turned at one point the conversation on to American film. Now in comics, we usually say, is it the 1986 with Frank Miller, Alan Moore, Art Spiegelman, or is it earlier than that?
Yeah, it's more so when it comes to comic books, the writing. Artwork. Was you always had
Right.
great outbursts of great art.
And it's weird because we also I've been thinking about it this week because we have to qualify it too, just especially when we turn to film, because our candidates, I know my candidates, when we talk about film, we go back to the 40s. And I've, over the years, have come up with different ones. My current one, I would say, is Grapes of Wrath, John Ford's Grapes of Wrath, the John Steinbeck novel. Or another movie from this year that came out the same year as A Matter of Life and Death is The Best Years of Our Life, a great post-war movie. And the criterion I've been thinking of is, when does adult level ambiguity start to come into storytelling? When is things not getting neatly tied up? And there's a part of me that really wants to put this movie in there, except as we're going to dive into, the really fun ambiguity about this movie is the dual levels of, is this a fantasy or not, which to a certain extent, Wizard of Oz, other movies have done this, but at the same time, this movie is shockingly modern and just so sophisticated and just, it just knocks it out of the park on a technical storytelling level. It's so much fun. It is the first Jack Cardiff movie to work with the Archers, the name of Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger, the writing, directing, producing team.
Yeah, we should mention that this is a team.
At this time, at the beginning of their careers, they were a team. They wrote, directed, and produced together, and they shared a title card together. They did not, much like the Coens, or later Coens, they did not differentiate between who's directing, even though it was Michael Powell was directing, and Pressburger was the one that was writing more. Is that what you...
but then Powell would actually go over and do a final draft or a final takeover of what Pressburger had written, and Pressburger took care of a lot of the production problems, and it sounds like he took care of some of the Powell, once the film was done, for the most part, Powell would take off to a hike in the Scottish Highlands, and Powell would be there with the post-production and the music.
Pressburger, you mean, would be with the music?
Because Pressburger's a musician himself.
Well, what's so fun, I was trying to look up, maybe you have some more information about this. Their breakup was amicable, and seemed like it just happened because people stopped, or they had trouble funding, and Powell then started directing on his own, and then their careers ended back together again.
They did a couple more films later on after they had technically broken up. But yeah, they did a couple more films later before they stopped altogether.
Oh. Well, so one of the undeniably, as I mentioned, Jack Cardiff shot most of the great movies of theirs, and the 3-strip Technicolor process that they were using here is pretty defining. I mean, what's the word?
Should we? Yeah,
textbook.
But should we first some of a little synopsis of the story?
Yeah. Do you want to do that, Ted?
Well, just the David Niven. He's a British air pilot, and he jumps out of a plane without a chute. But right before he did that, he talked to a station headquarters, the Air Force Tower or whatever.
An American one, played by Kim Hunter.
Yeah, but and actually playing an American girl from Boston, Massachusetts. And it's very important that she's American because they will tell you about that later.
Right.
Anyway, he survives the jump. And he miraculously meets her. They fall in love, but it turns out he was supposed to die. I don't want to give, if you haven't seen this thing, I don't know, we may end up giving it away.
I think we should dive in. See, I am worried also about, we're still figuring out format, and part of me, if we're going to be enthusiastic about a movie, it's weird because I want to sell this movie to people, but we need to talk spoilers.
Yeah, but the wonderful thing is, here's the great thing about it. Heaven. Well, I don't want to call it heaven.
Well, the thing is,
I want to talk about that too. There's some point in that. But the afterlife of what happens to you after you die in this universe is in black and white, and Earth is in for 3-strip Technicolor.
A reverse of the Wizard of Oz. Yes.
Right, and the fact that normally films are black and white, and then you would think, oh, glorious afterlife would be beautiful. In fact, it's so funny. The guy that messed up, the conductor who messed up retrieving him in time, he makes a joke.
One is starred for Technicolor there.
He's French.
And as you might not be able to tell from the terrible accent.
But anyway, yeah, one is starred for Technicolor out there, and it's just, and Michael Powell said that it got laughs, and he says, when I heard people laughing at that, he says, I could do anything. After that, when he heard that, he goes, I can do anything. So if you go on and start watching the films after this film, you see that he follows up on that and goes for the jugular.
Are we done?
Cinematic jugular.
Have we synopsized the movie?
I think so. Well, I guess.
Can we move on?
I think so. I mean, but basically, here I guess we should say. So she, Kim Hunter, who
we're gonna have to go more into the story. We're gonna have to spoil this whole story.
Right.
Hopefully, if you're listening to this point and you haven't seen the movie yet, I really hope our enthusiasm just tells you to stop this right now, watch the movie, and come back, because we are deep diving into this movie and why this movie's so damn good. Specifically, what happens is that he gets, they don't say in the movie, but between the lines, he hits his head and he gets a form of epilepsy, and they weren't willing to talk about it at the time. And the woman he falls in love with is friends with a town doctor who also is a neuroscientist, or at least is well versed in neuroscience. And he's convinced that they need to operate somehow and fix the epilepsy. And they're also talking about this whole plot line with the conductor, the angel, the person that's supposed to guide you into I forget what they call the afterlife in there. And so he's being pulled into the afterlife, or if he can stay on Earth, and it gets to a trial point as to whether he can stay or not. And the doctor on Earth is convinced that this is all in his head, but it still matters, because if he doesn't win the trial, then he's going to irreparably go insane.
Yeah, the doctor totally.
That's the non-fantastical.
Right, but what's so funny, you're almost convinced that the doctor does believe it, because what happens to him, in the process.
That's a part I almost don't want to. Bad. Yeah. Oh, God, this movie's so good.
So, but yeah, I got to go back to just Michael Powell. If you watch this film and are not enthralled or enchanted by it, I'm wondering how true a film fan.
This movie, it just hits on every level. Cinema, when it works, is supposed to hit on so many levels, and this does it. So, I want to ask you, when was the first time you saw this movie?
I saw it at the Belcourt in Nashville. I knew about it. I had read about it. I think I even knew about it under its USAA title, Stairway to Heaven. In one of my books, in a picture book. But I didn't see it till post Scorsese starting to blabbering about how much he loved.
You'd seen like Red Shoes and Black Narcissus up to that point, right?
No, I don't.
Really?
Well, no. Probably Red Shoes.
I was going to say Red Shoes, I think I had seen.
No, I still have quite a few Powell films to still see. But I got the chance to see it. They did a restoration. I don't know what year it was, but
I'm guessing it would have been 2008, 2009.
Yeah, and I was down there for that. It was glorious to see them on the big screen in 35 millimeter.
And you saw it in 35. That's got to. I would have first seen it. Ted, we were discussing this before recording. Ted was convinced. He introduced me to the DVD restoration, which is where I first saw it, and it's a double. It includes a later Michael Powell movie, which, to be fair, is a bizarre movie.
Yeah, solo Michael Powell.
Age of Consent is one of Helen Mirren's first movies where she is close to 18 years old and is naked for the majority of the movie. It's got James Mason, and it's got a very entitled song that would not last in the Me Too era at all. But
yeah, I picked it up in Austin when I was coming down to visit you on your first visit, and I was so excited to get, because at the time, the Michael Powell stuff was just kind of coming out, just very, sprinkling out. It wasn't, there wasn't a deluge. You couldn't get your hands on it, and you kept on hearing about this. And then once I did, as I was discovering, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is such a moviegoers love fest. Just it's like I said it, but it seems like it's a secret. It's such a big secret.
I first saw the movie shortly after you mentioned this on that same DVD box set. I had rented it when I was my first few months in LA working on a big movie, and it was a very exciting time. And you're, especially in the middle of a project like that, you're looking for inspiration. And this movie blew me the fuck away. It is, I just wanted everyone I knew to know about this movie. And yet it was still a hard sell. But one of the things that, on a very basic level, I'm a blockbuster kid from the 80s. And so one of the ways I got into the movies was studying special effects. And the special effects in this movie are so prodigiously used. And I mean, even rewatching this the other day, I was so blown away with how the high volume of them and like how free they were. But at the same time, like they're very meticulous. These movies are not high budgeted movies. These movies are also so pristinely shot. But so the opticals in this movie, you wouldn't want to do too many opticals because you mess with your negative that way. But at the same time, like there's some special effects in there that like. When you look at milestones of VFX films, like weirdly, some people talk about this, some people don't, that like things like Citizen Kane are in there, and this is one of those movies that should be in there.
Yeah. And again, what I keep on astounded at, you think of English cinema, UK cinema, you think of the early Hitchcock, the Ealing Studio output, then you get to the kitchen sink films, and you just kind of get this black and white dour or quaint comedies, and there's nothing like these films that they do that just seem there's like a sexual spiritual energy to them.
There's an adult sophistication.
Yeah, and a fantastical element that
anything can happen too.
Yeah, and they just seem to be off kilter a little bit to make it going, gosh, where is this coming from? And how do these two guys together create this magic? And I challenge you guys, if you're out here, if you haven't seen any of these films.
Well, the way I was trying to sell this movie at the time, and I still kind of think of this way, is you mentioned Hitchcock. They were contemporaries, and they knew each other.
Powell actually wrote with Hitchcock on a film.
Yeah, and in fact, we can go deeper into this story, but while casting this movie, Powell and Pressburger went to America because they were also in the war was ending, and they were selling their films to American audiences, and they were also casting the movie. And Hitchcock was the one that recommended Kim Hunter for this movie. And I have always viewed Powell. There's a certain visual, the way they set up their movies, they seem like they're storyboarded within an inch of their life. But at the same time, the visual language they tell with is so writing with lightning. And in many ways, Powell is the Hitchcock if Hitchcock's dad hadn't taken him to a jail cell when he was a kid. Because, I love Hitchcock.
The Catholic Guild.
Yeah. I love Hitchcock, but Hitchcock is always obsessed with mysteries, criminality, good guys and bad guys, wrong man aside, maybe, or he's always into, there's a very formulaic. There's a straitjacket on the type of plots Hitchcock would still inevitably do, and Powell Pressburger, they took those gifts of writing with the camera and went into so many different subjects. I mean, beyond this movie, they got into opera, ballet.
Well, that's one thing about the Black Narcissus is a very good example of this. As opposed, I think there's a really good story, strong story plot element in the one we're talking about tonight.
Yes,
right now.
This is a very plotted movie.
But Powell says color and theme are much more important than the plot.
Oh,
so if you Black Narcissus,
it came out in different movies, and at the same time, when you look at a movie like this movie is very literary. I mean, the amount of poets mentioned in this movie, and just the language in this movie.
Well, that's interesting because let's get to some plot points too. We keep on referring to the afterlife. It's never referred to as heaven.
It's referred to heaven once, but it's by someone offhanded.
Well, it's I'm okay, but I'm thinking it until we get to the end.
I remember
when he quotes Walter Scott.
Oh, right.
The judge.
Yes.
So
And God, I remember, is only mentioned until the very end too.
right, it's very, and I mentioned it to a friend. I go, hey, it's not saying heaven, but my friend goes, oh, but they did mention Jesus. I go, yeah, but
They do mention Jesus.
they mentioned Jesus next to Plato and Aristotle.
Yeah.
So, in other words, Jesus is an equal philosopher next to
Right.
he's rattling off great writers, philosophers, not exactly the religious savior. So they're playing it really interesting because they don't want to if you're very strong religious and how you picture heaven and everything else, they don't want to turn you off. But
So to the erudition in this movie, I want to point out the origins of this came. The British film industry at this point is still regulated by movies Churchill and I don't know who.
this is the last film they did. Pretty much, we're still under the Ministry of Information.
And they asked them basically to make sure Anglo-American relations were good. They wanted to make sure the English and Americans were getting around. And it's funny because there's a funny quote. It was basically they considered them. Oh, it was overpaid, oversexed, and over here was the quote.
Yeah, yeah. The relationships had starting to weaken again between UK and USA. And Powell goes, "Well, we've already done those films because early on they had done a couple of propaganda
And
films."
he loved America.
Yeah, and he said we already.
He married an American, which we should talk about that too.
Well, I'm sorry. That's Powell. Pressburger said we already did a couple of these films, 49th Parallel and another one, and that try to bridge the gap there. It's so forward thinking too. There's a lot of
Oh my god!
there's all kinds of the different ethnic people that show up in the film.
Oh my gosh!
And
Man. Well, okay. So they get to heaven, and I just laugh so hard at this. So heaven is
if you want to call it heaven.
the next world, I think is what they officially called it,
Yeah.
something like that. And the movie takes place a month before D-Day, and everyone coming to heaven, I noticed multiple times, are all allies. There's no Axis in there. There was apparently Courier 71 was supposed to originally, maybe they were going to write him German, but there was something they couldn't do that. And the introduction to the Americans, as much as they're trying to make a peace between Americans, is comical because the Americans rush into heaven. They're just so like, we meant to be here, and they go straight to the Coke.
Coca-Cola machine.
And
There's a vending Coca-Cola machine up there.
They ask about a U.S. show, and then when they find out there aren't, they're like, "This will work out," and they're like, "We want officers' quarters."
By the way, when you get up there, you're handed wings, and they're in a sealed plastic bag for you.
Yeah.
For convenient.
And
carrying.
and then there's a shot coming up there that is the thing that just really started to blow my mind. It's not just it's an intense model shot. It's a great set shot, but like they move over, they want to see the what they call them, the couriers or the workers who are trying to figure out who's going to
filing
heaven.
down
the filing, yes,
down below.
And then it's. Oh, this is just cinema working, and like this is like modern cinema, like special effects movies. Like the other thing I love to tell people is like this is where the Coen Brothers were born. There's a shot where it goes to the model, then it cuts to a matte painting, and it matches so well in the scope of the movie, which has gone back and forth between being so intimate and realistic to suddenly so fantastical.
Yeah, we should mention that it opens up this prologue, that's animation.
Oh, I noted. Yeah, it's a great animated sequence. I remember noting to myself, it's a beautiful shot, but it looks a lot like the Duck Dodgers and the 24th century opening. But the other funny thing in there that I noted was that they mentioned there's a supernova goes off, and they go, "Is that the uranium atom?" And I think this has to be the first mention of the atomic bomb after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Because, I mean, I was trying to figure if there was the first ever mention of an atomic bomb ever in a movie, but Hitchcock's Saboteur has a plot line.
Also, I'm watching this, and I'm thinking this time around, like, this is kind of like a little bit of a Disney cartoon.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's maybe a little bit of UPA cartoon from the 50s in America in it. And like you said, the Warner Brothers Duck Dodgers. And then it hit me, oh, no, it's also the opening to It's a Wonderful Life.
With the wings, I wrote that down too. Yeah. Well, the funny thing
because
is, like,
they're up there, the animation, they're talking, they're up there talking to each
that's
other.
very true. Okay,
yeah,
I get
see?
Well, it's an animated opening, but at the same time, until like movies later in the 70s, I think 2001 would have been the first one that started it. Models took over more of this stuff. Animation really was a big part of special effects up to that point. Because I mean, 2001 actually. A lot of the effects in there are done animated ways. And I remember also pointing out, this movie shares this other thing with 2001. Before they had photos of the Earth, no one knew what the hell the Earth looked like. Earth is this weird green moss.
Yeah, they thought it would be
twirling
green
thing.
because of the greenery, yeah. But then, okay, so then we get past this interesting animated prologue. So you're like, oh, okay, this is kind of weird and ethereal and whatever. And then we get to this shot, David Niven in this burning aircraft talking to this close-up of Kim Hunter. And if this scene is not the one of the best written, exciting, just grabs you. And if you're not grabbed by this scene, you're not going to go with this movie. I mean,
Okay, here's the other thing. Modern audiences will know this scene, especially if you're a Marvel fan, as this scene was very liberally homaged, if you will, at the end of the first Captain America movie.
very nice.
And it's very deliberate because the scriptwriter of that movie was Joss Whedon, who's a big fan of this movie. I'm not 100% sure he's the one that wrote that because I have a tendency not to give Marcus and Mafeely, the people that wrote a bunch of that and a bunch of other Marvel, credit. And since retroactively watching it, they're the MVPs of the Marvel universe. But yes, that scene and the power at the end of Captain America is ripping off the opening of A Matter of Life and Death.
Also, did you think when the doctor who's working on David Niven, who was played by Roger Livesey, which we maybe talk about him at some point, but he the way he rides his motorcycle and the way it's shot makes me think of
Lawrence of Arabia.
Lawrence of Arabia.
Oh my
I
God.
think David Lee, obviously,
It was funny because when I was watching the movie, we're going to spoilers again. Reminder, we're going to spoilers. When we first saw them, watch it again, I'd forgotten certain plot points, and I just remember how reckless it was shot, and it reminded me of Lawrence of Arabia, and I was like, oh, I wonder where this is going, and
yeah, so yeah, there's just all kinds of stuff like that. But that opening and David Niven said this is probably one of his favorite roles he ever did.
yeah.
He's just this prime David Niven at his.
At the end of this shot, it zooms in and shows a map of Europe with this gorgeous fog.
This is after the animation.
Going off the animation.
prologue.
And one of the other just tiny modern things is they use a real radio broadcast of Hitler in there.
Oh yeah. There's like some really interesting audio. Things that are throughout the whole film.
Throughout the whole film.
And then, how do you like that? There's this sequence when he lands. He survives this fall. Actually, this is based on a true story. Apparently, a pilot did jump and survive, and they're not sure how he did it. He's on the beach and he's walking along, and he comes across this little shepherd boy. And
the pan flute boy who is completely naked.
He's completely naked, and so David Niven thinks he's still in heaven.
He's just throwing his clothes off because he thinks he's leaving behind his earthly.
Yeah, he takes off his outer. He leaves his jumpsuit on, but he takes off his boot and clothes, jacket. But what's so funny is Powell and Pressburger keep extending the length of what he still thinks it's heaven. I'm still in heaven. Oh, it's a beach. Oh, there's a very fantasy looking thing of a naked pan flute boy.
And then there's the distinct moment where he makes it real, which it's.
Oh yeah, nice again, nice cut.
I mean, well, it's not even.
It's
a great sound. It's great. It's such a dynamic shot. It's. I mean, I feel like almost every one of these sentences is going to end with "This movie's so good. You should stop what you're doing and watch
I know.
this."
I mean, it's like we should. I don't know if we're hopefully we're trying to entice you to check it out. It's because it's so good.
I mentioned this earlier, but I really was trying to sell people also that I don't think the Coen Brothers have ever mentioned this movie, but I feel a lot of Big Lebowski in this movie, just because mainly the fantasy sequence where you go through this giant gothic set in between this very pedestrian set up until that point.
I hadn't thought about it. I mean,
I think I think what it comes down to is Coen's can continue this Hitchcock lineage of heavily storyboarding and pre-visualizing a movie, and there are people like Spielberg and Scorsese who still storyboard, but not to the extent that people like Hitchcock or Powell Pressburger would have put together a movie beforehand.
I do think that the Coen Brothers, if you want to bring them into the subject matter of this, is that they are such insular film fans, and their films are not for everybody.
I think that's where I got.
And again, we may be slobbering about this Michael Powell and Pressburger, the Archers films, and they might not be your cup of tea. They might not be for everybody. Maybe that's why they still remain kind of a weird secret amongst hardcore film fans. They are just such a unique look and language, especially in this period where they got Jack Cardiff doing the Technicolor. And
I'm not gonna say all of them work perfectly, but there's a part of me that's just wants to throw down the gauntlet and say, if you don't like this, if you can't see anything redeemable about this movie, I don't know, that is kind of a snotty gauntlet to throw down. Say, if you don't like this movie, you don't like movies.
No, yeah, it does sound. I don't want it to be that way, but boy, it's just the unique vision these two guys.
To be fair, okay, Powell says that this is his favorite of their movies, and Pressburger says Life and Death of Colonel Blimp is the favorite of his movies, which I think is probably Scorsese's favorite movie. And
no, Red Shoes, it's Scorsese.
Red Shoes, that makes sense. Colonel Blimp, I've only seen once, and left me indifferent. I probably need to rewatch that.
No, I remember was really entranced by that too.
I had the very basic pedestrian problem with that, where I didn't know it was a 3-hour movie when I was watching it.
They also had they got in trouble with Churchill and the Ministry of Information. They didn't like the fact that this old British officer, who's Colonel Blimp, was wanting to maintain his friendship with a German general.
I had heard that, actually.
And so here, it's funny that because you mentioned earlier about how the whole reason for the movie Matter of Life and Death is to to unite the two. Well, not Germans, but just in friendly.
The movie's released a year after the war ended, so yeah. I mean, there's no love lost for the Axis powers.
Right.
That
well, and the Axis Germany of World War I is sort of a different aspect, and then the Germany of the war too.
Right. The as much as we've been going on about the visuals of this movie, from an editorial standpoint, and I went over the optical effects they were doing earlier, which are very impressive. But there's a lot of playing with sound and reversals and reverse shots, and whenever the angels come, time freezes, and there's some really fun basic stuff. Yeah, I did order. Powell's written 2 books, and his second one, which is a more thorough covering of his career, is a doorstop, so I didn't get to read much of it. But part of what I read from this movie was how much his special effects regimen and came from a love of Cecil B. DeMille, and he used a lot of people that work with that. And they worked a lot off of old-style tricks like the Parting of the Red Seas from the Ten Commandments, the original Ten Commandments, not even the 57 version. And throughout Powell Pressburger, there's a love of just special effects and playing around with things, fantastical things that you wouldn't see normally in a movie. And Ted, your eyes are glazing over so much right now.
Well, no, I mean, it's almost it's hard to articulate how these films work on you. Like I said, it's mood and color and the music, and even I just watched it just a few days ago, and I'm almost wanting to watch it again just to get some other pieces of dialogue in and see watch some other sequences again, because they're just the composition of it.
The compositions, oh my God!
And in fact, it's interesting because there was a South Bank TV show with Michael Powell talking about his life, and he said. With Black Narcissus, he finally thought he came to the point where he came up with the composed film, and he said that
it should be noted that I typically have problems with composed films because they always feel very airtight, and these movies do not.
No, these are live. These are vibrant,
so colorful. And the thing is, there's these painterly compositions that work and just have such passion behind them.
And I'd never forget. Another one that just shook me to my core right from the beginning, just like this one did, is I Know Where I'm Going. The title credit sequence.
That is one of the greatest title credit sequences.
What they do is they basically tell you the character, the whole story, and the full character personality of the character you're going to follow in the movie in the credits. And not only do they tell you this, they do it very graphically designed.
I know where I'm going.
I mean, and the credits are like fit into the back of a milk truck or a gate of a factory as you're learning about this female Wendy Hiller who plays the female lead in the movie.
I think I do want to go a little into this. I don't want to lose people, but some technical stuff in this movie is just mind-blowingly ahead of its time. So Jack Cardiff, who became a very beloved cinematographer, this is technically his first movie. He came from this as he was working as in the Technicolor department, and he also worked alongside a bunch of other technicians that went on to have great careers, like Jeffrey Unsworth, who shot 2001 and Superman. And Powell was torn between using the one they've worked with forever, but Cardiff came up with this idea of how to do the black and white and color. Now, again, I'm sorry to deep dive into all this technical stuff, but it's very hard to mix color and black and white because you have different film stocks. And so if you print black and white on color stock, you might have this overlap tinge that you don't want. And then you get into this even further deep dive where you have to like alternate color stocks. And Michael Powell later married Thelma Shoemaker, the editor for Martin Scorsese, and she talked a lot about their problems in doing Raging Bull, which has one single color sequence, an 8mm sequence in there on top of the title credits, which have those glorious red title in there. The process they did on this, I just was stuck figuring this out, and it wasn't until I read the book that I found it out. What they did was the movie shot on color Technicolor, but when they go to black and white, they take all the dyes out, so it's monochrome. But the transition shots in here, they still have to figure out the transition shots, and there are some beauts in here. Like
the transition happens right in front of your eyes when the conductor's coming.
It's really difficult to dissolve
to Afterworld, and he lands on Earth, and you go from black and white to color right in front of your eye.
It's very difficult to dissolve between the two. And one of my favorite transitions, color transitions in the movie is, oh my God, this shot is. It's when he's going under for surgery and he's getting anesthesia and his eyes close.
David Niven. Yeah.
David Niven's eyes close. And it gives you a single eye POV of the actual eyelid comes
with
over
his
the lens.
And its eyelid, and it's...
Well, you said you think it dropped.
I don't know. I mean, do you think it really... I mean, what did you think when you first saw that? I think I almost kind of laughed out loud. It's so
literal.
It's such a. I don't know.
Well, okay.
Do you think it works? I mean,
yes, because the front.
Why should it be in there?
Because the front end of the shot, I'll give you credit. Maybe it's a little too much when you first see it, but the way it transitions, it goes into.
Oh well, yeah. Once the lids close.
Once the lids close, it starts to track down, and it goes into a modern day special effects thing called a cloud tank, which. Again, this movie's just so modern and nails so many other things with so many different techniques, and it becomes this like Stan Brakhage movie or a Stan Brakhage shot in the middle of the movie, but it works, and then it transitions to heaven in black and white into this like really giant high wide shot, a special effects shot with a bunch of people in heaven overhead.
Oh no! They're all. But with the shot when they're looking through the hole and they look down the filing, it looks like in some ways it almost.
Which shot?
Earlier on when she shows the one pilot, the filing cabinets and everything down below and the circular.
That was the one I was referring to earlier when it goes into the map.
It almost looks like a computer, a board.
Definitely, like a circuit board.
Circuit board, which is really weird. By coincidence, I mean it's foreshadowing a circuit board. And then also, but the eyelid thing, yeah, I don't know. It always strikes me every time I forget about it, and it shows up. I'm like, oh my gosh.
But it gets a laugh out of you.
Yeah, it does get a little laugh, a little a giggle.
This is one of those examples of why the movie's still fun too.
Yeah. I mean,
and inventive. It's so inventive.
Yes, it always surprises you with a special effect. Or the dialogue, or the mise en scène of the whole look of the film is just wonderful.
Yeah, not to mention, I think there's like 15 different lines we should have mentioned that I haven't given the dialogue credit. The language, again, back to the literary. This is a literary movie. It's a very smart movie in that regard. It loves language.
Yeah, it's smart, but it's fun, and I think it's a wonderful combination. It encourages you to think almost above yourself, more so than instead of sitting back and just letting it wash over you. You kind of it washes over you in a different way.
I know there's one shot later in the movie where the co-pilot comes back to Earth.
Yeah.
I still don't know how I did that. I mean, I had to rewind that multiple times where basically in the foreground, he stays in color and the background doesn't. And in modern times, you can composite out the foreground and it's not a big deal. But with optical printing times, it was harder with optical printers, which, were how special effects were done until about the early 90s. And even then, when they were really popular in the 70s and 80s, it still was not the most exact science. Now, you go back 50 years, no one's doing it, and it looks terrible typically. There's always all this extra dusk and film noise on there. And seriously, I don't know if he went in frame by frame and took the dye out for the background, I don't know how this shot was done.
Yeah, and there's a reason Cardiff got an honorary Oscar finally.
There's a shot shot in the same sequence just a few later that I think that was the one that really made me go gaga on my first viewing because it's so casual. But as an optical, it's unnecessary. But I watched it even more than that other shot where they all walk through the door.
No.
And you could see some of the compositing doesn't work on the top of that, but at the same time, to do it so casually in a shot that didn't need to be done. It's a wide shot where 3 characters walk through a door invisible, something that's very common now. It was even common probably in the 50s and 60s too, but just the way it was composed and done, it made it very difficult on everyone involved with that movie for shots just to make it look so casual and effortless. And it worked.
Right. And then what do you think about the look of the afterworld? Just the overall look.
That's where
it doesn't date. It was really interesting that they it's not like little iron gates and stuff.
And then you get the trial at the end when they pull back and you see the model and the size of it, and that shot it doesn't look fake.
Yeah, Raymond Macy, he's another American actor drawn over, and he goes, "For the Archers, I'll do any film, anytime, anywhere," or something like that. He said when he got the call to do this film. He's the prosecutor. He's a revolutionary person that died.
So by the time he takes over the film, I want to say my first viewing.
It gets a little talky. There's a little bit of maybe a little bit of a drag here and there.
It was a lot easier the second time going through, knowing that I think the drama to them was Americans and Britons getting along, because the trial hinged so much on the differences between the British and Americans. And Raymond Massey plays, in theory, the first man killed
in the Revolution,
which was funny because I watched rewatched this the other night. I've been doing this thing with my stepmom and my dad where I pick a bunch of, I have an expansive watch list on TCM and let them pick an old movie to watch. And before watching this, I watched an Arthur Hiller movie written by Patty Chayefsky called The Americanization of Emily, about the invasion of D-Day. And a big plot point in that movie is the first sailor to die on D-Day. And then I watched the next movie that takes place a month before D-Day, and in it is the first man that dies in the American Revolutionary War.
And just on a trivia note now, and one of my favorite actresses that the Powell uses is Catherine Byron, and she's in this film, but she's the nun that goes psychotic in the Black Narcissus.
And she's stunning.
She's very interesting, and she's in several other films. Guess what? She's Mrs. Ryan. Old Mrs. Ryan in Saving Private Ryan.
I did go to the IMDb thing and saw she was in Saving Private Ryan, but I did not.
And
because I read it was in the Powell book, they talked about when he was getting ready to make the movie, he came over to New York and met with her and walked through Central Park, and they were attracted to each other in real life, but she had married an American soldier.
I mean, again, it's that film's dealing with D-Day, so it's all this. Oh, there's all this synchronicity going on here. It's also movie history.
Well, it's also funny. The other thing that came out of the book that was really fascinating, I think you might have heard this on the Blu-ray, is that Powell, you mentioned earlier, Powell rewrote a lot of this. Before they shot the movie, they had to come to America for a bunch of different reasons, and there was only 3 specific ways you can come over just while the war was still going, because there was still dangerous going on. And he ended up taking a ship crowded with a bunch of wounded American soldiers who were coming back home. And he fell in love with the soldiers and rewrote the movie based on the banter that they told in the stories. There was a bunch of soldiers from like Minnesota and Wisconsin who started fighting over states and which state was better.
Yeah, and of course, another way to look at this film and what David Niven has was a PT stress disorder.
Post-traumatic stress
Yeah,
disorder.
that is another way.
PTSD.
Which we didn't have a terminology for. We didn't have the term for it back then.
Well, the thing, Powell, the shockingly modern thing. I mentioned this earlier, how much neuroscience is in this movie, and there was some woman that was a big fan wrote a book about the neuroscience of this movie and how accurate some of it was, and she was the one. They started talking about the epilepsy being the unspoken thing.
This one movie inspired this woman to write just an entire book of.
I'm really obsessed with neuroscience. Neuroscience is, you know, all your emotions are a chemical response in your brain, and this movie addresses this. Like, I don't know when this would have, the next time it would have appeared in a movie.
Yeah.
Much less this is probably the first mention of it ever in a movie.
And let's also don't. It's funny at times.
Oh.
It's romantic.
Oh, it's stunningly romantic.
And so, you know,
the ending is stunningly touching and romantic.
I know we're talking about these special effects and all the science jargon thrown out and blah 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 blah. But man, it goes all over the map. It covers all the bases. And
I think we're talking about how much this movie accomplishes, like, on so many different levels.
You know, tight narrative drive.
It's only 144 minutes.
Yeah, once you get past the animated
44.
prologue and you get to the David Niven and the aircraft, bang, it goes. It just flies and isn't lit up afterwards. You know, it just goes.
Yeah.
The doctor, I want to talk about Roger Livesley. He is wonderfully British. And Powell, a favorite of Powell and Pressburgers, and he was a really big discovery of mine. I go, where has this guy been? But Blimp, I mean, I'm not sure if I, you know, had seen him as an older. I don't know where when he died or his acting career went. But these Powell Pressburger films he's in are just wonderful. He's in I Know Where I'm Going.
Yeah, and those two shot right next to each other.
Yeah.
This and he looks, the beard is so distinctly different.
Yeah, apparently I either on one of the discs or the books or something. They were waiting for the Technicolor camera, so they shot I Know Where I'm Going to kill time before they could get their hands on the camera.
Yeah, I saw that, and I was trying to remember what movie the camera was, and I kept thinking
it was over in America. I think they had to come over.
I thought it was a David Lean movie.
Oh,
but
was it? Okay.
Well, but I think he would have shot Brief Encounter at this time, which is a black and white movie, so I don't know if that fits.
But yeah, and speaking of Cardiff, I have to throw this in just because I love one of my favorite boyhood films was directed by Jack Cardiff. Jack did do some directing, not anything super great, but there's a couple interesting gems to watch. But my favorite, it doesn't really hold up watching it as an adult, but I still love it, is The Long Ships.
I don't know.
It's a Richard Widmark Viking movie with Sidney Poitier. Actually, Tarantino was a fan of it. If you listen to the commentary, Tarantino did a commentary for True Romance, and there's a Long Ships reference in there, and I was just like, oh my gosh, Quentin knows everything. But it's a really cool little film that Cardiff directed, and if you think about Richard Widmark's physique, and he's this kind of boisterous Viking, it says a lot right there.
I do want to say one thing. One of the best shots at the beginning of the movie, going back to the technical thing, I have to get this out because this is so dumb, nerdy technical, but the shot of Kim Hunter when she's talking to Niven.
With her microphone up by the mouth.
I am going to tell you something so that you can no longer unsee it. When you're an editor, one of the things you have to do is protect the cinematographer and all the camera crew because mistakes happen all the time. That shot is buzzed in the wrong way. At least that was my first viewing of it. Because what it is when you have a close-up or you're trying to show a face, typically, with very few exceptions, what you want to do is if you have a low-depth field, you want to focus on the eyes. And when you look at that shot, her hair behind her is what's in focus. Now, when I rewatched it, I then started being more honest with myself. You've heard cinematographers talk about putting Vaseline on the lens to give the soft, beautiful glow on it. I think maybe it's just a beauty shot.
Oh, probably. Yeah, I'd have to. What you're talking about, I have to examine that again when I watch it again. But
I'm glad I had to shoehorn that one in.
But you know what I really wanted to do with this podcast for both of us was just to kind of tell you our reaction to this film in our own words. But we've been rattling off a lot of stuff that we read and knew and have learned and processed over the years about Powell and Pressburger. But it's just
But the movies contain so much.
Quirky.
And the thing is, you mentioned this multiple times. The movies work.
Yeah, it really does. I was on Amazon.
Oh, I know what it would. The one Powell Pressburger movie I still haven't seen. I didn't know if it's out there. It got recut by David O. Selznick. It was Jennifer Jones, The Good Earth, is it?
Yes, Kino Lorber's put both versions out together.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
It just came out.
That's not the title, is it? Gone to Earth.
Gone to Earth.
It's called Gone to Earth. And when it came out in America, it had a different title. And it was when Jennifer Jones was married to David O. Selznick, and the movie has her with a fox for most of the runtime.
Yeah, I'm excited to get that. Kino Lorber put that out.
That's the last one, I think. We haven't talked about Peeping Tom, and Peeping Tom is.
Yeah, we should mention this for you guys, that if you're interested in Michael Powell and you find this, that what we said is interest you has got you interested. One of the major films he does after he splits from Pressburger is the 1959-1960 Peeping Tom, and what's so amazing, it pretty much destroyed his career.
It was so shocking, and it was a little too ahead of its time, violence-wise.
It's about a guy, a filmmaker, and he's filming the moment of death on these females, and he uses he has a tripod with a blade in it, and he's obsessed about trying to catch the moment of death on film.
I haven't seen the movie in forever, and being blind, I haven't thought about it in a while. What relation was it to Hitchcock at the time? Were they still talking to each other? Were they?
I don't know. I don't know if they were linked together or not. But
because Psycho comes really close.
But that's what's so ironic is Psycho's such a huge hit, and even elevates Hitchcock even bigger. And Peeping Tom basically destroys Powell.
It's one of those bizarre movies that's too effective, and it's also the British critical press was just really rough. They were
really rough. And so he did, like I said, he did some stuff after that, but it didn't really nothing. It was pretty much over for him. And then he comes over to America, and then that's when Spielberg and Coppola and Scorsese embrace him. He marries a pretty big age gap between Thelma Schoonmaker and him, Scorsese's editor. I think he's on the staff for Zoetrope for Coppola as an advisor.
Yeah,
and stuff like that. And again, like I said, Spielberg uses Catherine Byron and Saving Private Ryan. So all this stuff's going on. It's all there. And even I think on the criterion of Red Shoes, they have one of the features is showcasing Scorsese's Red Shoes collection of items. He's collected that much stuff on Red Shoes.
Really?
Yeah.
I did want to mention Red Shoes, that when my nieces were growing up and they started getting into dancing, that was one of the films I showed them. And to be fair, I didn't show them the entire film. I just showed them some dancing sequences in there. But that was a captivating
sequence. Yeah, and whether you like dancing or not, that film is concerning about the creative force, being what you have to do to be an artist.
But that goes to what you were saying earlier, his quote about color and theme. Because that's one of the things where that movie is like no dialogue for long sections, but you feel the opera of that movie playing out. You feel all the rhythms of that movie. It's working on so many levels with music and color, and just this is cinema without words when it really works.
Yeah, the Small Black Room was a Criterion release. It just came out of nowhere. I'm like, wow, it deals with an alcoholic, centered around an alcoholic. It's 1949, and they go back to black and white. And that's what they do after the Red Shoes.
I haven't seen that.
I recommend.
It's like a post Lost Weekend alcoholic movie.
Yeah, maybe. It's been so. I just remember being again. It's been so long. I need to go back and. But I was like, oh my gosh, they did it again. Powell and Pressburger. Every time I sit down and watch one, I'm always amazed.
There's a Criterion of it?
There's a Criterion of it, yeah. And then another Criterion that I loved. Remember, and I was kind of frustrated because my dad, I thought my dad would like it, and he didn't get into it. And this one actually failed. It was a failure for them in 1944. Before I Know Where I'm Going, Canterbury Tale.
That got mentioned a few times in the book, and actually, I don't think I've seen that one. Actually.
Yeah,
I might have. I can't.
It's dealing with the Pilgrim's Progress and the city of Kent, and just where Michael Powell, I think, grew up in, and I was very emotionally moved in that movie, and but I don't know. Yeah, I could see why it probably didn't do that well.
Well, when we talk about why Red Shoes worked and me going off about the ballet and the opera and all that, on the other end of it, I saw my last go in LA, I saw Tales of Hoffman, which is a very much more pure opera, and that one,
Might be a little hard to get.
it doesn't have enough landed narrative for me, and
Right.
so it's,
So a very composed film. When he's talking about his composed films, that's probably
Yeah.
the ultimate composed film, maybe.
yeah, very much so.
So-
But there's a great new restoration of that that's only a few years old.
Yeah, I thought I had it. I couldn't find my copy. I was pulling out my Proud Pressburgers on my shelf last night.
Do you have them
And
all?
No, I don't have everything.
They are like Pokemon for Ted.
Yeah, and there's still some that need to be released. I mean, officially on a decent release. But we should. I don't know. Are we ending here?
Do you want to go ahead and read this passage? What is this
Yeah.
passage?
Well, I just got a copy of Midsummer, the director's cut, and there's a
The
little.
book, the screenplay, A24 put out the screenplay. in
Well,
book
no,
form.
there's no screenplay. It's just a art book.
Really? I thought the whole thing was they were,
They do the screenplay books. Maybe they probably will do one. But.
Well, there's a certain someone who introduced. Or
So,
wrote the
anyways, we know
introduction.
Scorsese's just one of the biggest Michael Powell fans ever. Period. And one reason I think a lot of us have been introduced to Powell is through Scorsese and his great links. But here, it's interesting. We talked about Powell and his thoughts on film, about theme and color and stuff. So then I'm reading this, and he's talking about the opening of this Midsummer film. What am I? And this is quoting Scorsese. What am I looking for? I'm looking for people with a need to express something. Quote, I need you to experience this, unquote. Not an ideal or a theme as much as a whole experience or a recollection or a profound emotional impression from which the ideals and the themes emerge organically, so to speak. It's difficult to put into words for a reason because it can only be expressed in moving images and sounds. In other words, cinema. I tell you one thing, we should end with the last words when heaven is...
Do you want to go ahead and say it? Because
What?
it is. I'm trying to remember all the poets in there. The big one was Sir Walter Raleigh's in the first speech. Niven plays a poet, and Livesey is a very big appreciator of his poetry.
Shakespeare's dropped, of course.
Okay, yeah, and but at the very end, the movie ends with Ted. You want to
The
take
judge, quoting from Sir Walter Scott, goes, "For love is heaven, and heaven is love."
it? I think that's the best way to end this. So, thank you for listening for all of our ramblings. Seriously, is it on the Criterion channel?
No,
There's a
no.
gorgeous Criterion Blu-ray of this, and I beseech you. I have both the DVD and the Blu-ray because the DVD is the double set. Beseech you to go for the Blu-ray. The Blu-ray, this is, or if you ever have a chance post-pandemic to see it on the big screen, go for that. This is just a gorgeous Technicolor spectacle. This is cinema working on all levels, a matter of life and death. All right, that's all for this show.